Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything: geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Porkins Policy Radio. As always, I am your host, Pierce Redmond, and of course, you can listen to this radio show live here at American Freedom Radio. You can always find it archived as well under Porkins Policy Radio, and you can always visit my website as well, PorkinsPolicyReview.com, to hear this particular show and all the other podcasts that I do out there. And quickly, before we get started, just to everybody out there that really appreciates what AFR does and enjoys the material that you hear on AFR, whether it be me or Chuck Ocelli or Ed Opperman or any of the other the great hosts that we all have here. Please do help us out with any kind of donation that you can. As many of you already know, we are attempting to introduce a TV element to this, which would be very cool. And I know that Ed is a little opposed to the idea of himself being filmed, but I am not so afraid of that. So that would something I am definitely interested in, and we are very close to that. And we just need just a few $100 to make this happen. So if you can, please donate to the AFR TV project, and you can do this, of course, through the PayPal button on AFR, and I'll link up some stuff in the show notes as well, and post that when I post it on my website for anybody that wants to donate. But without further ado, let's get the show started. And joining me today is a very good friend of mine, someone who has been on my podcast many times, both the regular podcast as well as the CIA in Hollywood. So he is definitely no stranger to faithful listeners. But of course, it's a new show, new audience, so he may not be quite as familiar. But of course, I am joined by Robbie Martin. And Robbie, how are you?
Great, Pierce. Thanks for having me on. Congrats on the new show.
Excellent. Well, I guess, Robbie, for anyone that may not know, you are, of course, a co-host of Media Roots, which is a podcast that you've done now for many, many years. You've done a ton. You have your own record label. You are, of course, the filmmaker behind the epic film trilogy, A Very Heavy Agenda, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit later. But, Robbie, why don't you explain a little bit to the new listeners out there, who is Robbie Martin?
Well, so most of, the people who might have already heard about me or my work, probably know about me through my sister's show, Breaking the Set or Media Roots Radio, which I co-host with her. And, she founded Media Roots, many years ago before she got to Russia Today and was doing Breaking the Set. And, we've just been doing the podcast, pretty much the whole time. Maybe let's say over 5 years now. So we've been doing it sporadically. It's not the most consistent podcast, doesn't have a consistent release schedule. Because basically what's happening right now is Abby is working on her own show, The Empire Files, which is pretty much a weekly show, a mini documentary format. And I've been working on A Very Heavy Agenda, which I've just finished. And so right now, I'm kind of, trying to do more podcasts and just trying to follow up some of the, stories that I kind of left on the back burner before I started working on A Very Heavy Agenda, but very similar subject material. It's not if I told you what they were, you wouldn't be that surprised, probably. So.
Well, excellent. And as you said there, Robbie, you have been working very, very hard on A Very Heavy Agenda. As I said, it's a 3-part film trilogy, and we'll, of course, link up so that people can go and watch it. And for anyone that is unaware, A Very Heavy Agenda deals with the neoconservative movement, the neoconservative agenda, a lot of the people involved in all of that. And in this most recent part of the film, part 3, you talk quite a bit about some of the recent. Of course, what I wanted to talk to you. I mean, it's funny. We were talking about this like last week, preparing to have you on the show, and we were saying, oh, well, we want to talk about Hillary Clinton and the neocons and how much they just sort of love her, and we're going to talk about the DNC leak and stuff. And then just this morning when I woke up, I don't know if you have this, Robbie, if you buy on Amazon, but do you have the like Amazon Washington Post email every morning?
No.
Okay. Well, I don't know what it is. I must have like ticked the wrong box when I bought something on Amazon. But anyway, every day I get this like digest that I guess it's like the most visited articles or the most viewed articles on the Washington Post, which is of course owned by Jeff Bezos of Amazon. So it like shows up as like an Amazon email, but it's all articles from the Washington Post, and most of them are kind of garbage, but they're funny. It's like a lot about meth head chops up best friend and eats baby, and they're like the sensational articles. But one of the top articles underneath something again about Trump was, of course, this was an article by none other than Robert Kagan talking about how evil Donald Trump is and how we all have to support Hillary Clinton. And Robbie, you talk a lot about Robert Kagan throughout the film series, and you recently had the great pleasure of actually meeting Robert Kagan at a fundraiser that he threw, right, for Hillary Clinton. So explain this, because I've been dying to actually know what it was like being at the fundraiser, meeting Robert Kagan.
I don't think he had any idea who I was. I was an inkling in the back of my mind thinking that there's a small possibility he might know who I was, but as soon as I realized that wasn't the case, I kind of, all my anxiety kind of melted away of basically sneaking into this event, but not really sneaking in because I paid for a ticket to get in. And I'll just admit, I'll give you a little overview of exactly what happened. So Foreign Policy magazine, this guy named John Hudson, about 2.5 months ago, maybe 3 months ago, he wrote an article which kind of confirmed a lot of what I had been researching and reading and sort of putting into the movie series Very Heavy Agenda, which was that Robert Kagan was actually going to be hosting a fundraiser for Hillary Clinton. And this wasn't a huge surprise because Robert Kagan had been telegraphing for years that he was very comfortable with Hillary Clinton on foreign policy, especially after she left her position as Secretary of State. He was sort of helping put out this talking point, actually, which I would almost argue was a proto-Hillary campaign talking point, that she wanted people to know very early on, right when she left her position, that she was willing to go further than Barack Obama. And she felt like her hands were tied by Obama in several instances, with Syria, with Libya, for example. And Robert Kagan was sort of going out into the press and various newspapers and media outlets somewhere back in, I would say, 2013, 2014, essentially saying that, Hillary Clinton is, one of the greatest foreign policy strategists who's served. And I feel comfortable with her, as a neoconservative. He doesn't. That's the thing. Robert Kagan doesn't call himself a neoconservative anymore, but he still represents a very specific sect of neoconservative policymakers in D.C. And this sort of building a bridge to Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party for this sect of neocons was, I would argue, started back then when he was going out and saying, "I'm comfortable with her. She would have done more than Obama, etc." So, there was other articles that came out in between that saying that it was possible that he was maybe even going to endorse her. A lot of people were predicting that. And then, of course, their prediction came true. He actually did endorse her in a fairly recent editorial. I can't remember how long ago it was. It was pretty much after it seemed like Trump was going to clinch the nomination. He endorses Hillary Clinton. Max Boot endorses Hillary Clinton. Elliot Cohen endorses Hillary Clinton. A lot of neoconservatives in D.C. have openly endorsed Hillary Clinton.
Edelman.
Edelman, yeah. I mean, Edelman. So this is another thing. This sort of coming before this event is that Eric Edelman, Robert Kagan, and Michelle Flournoy. Michelle Flournoy and Eric Edelman are not as well. Actually, Michelle Flournoy is not in a very heavy agenda at all. Eric Edelman is the co-founder of the Foreign Policy Initiative with Robert Kagan, Dan Senor, and Bill Kristol. And he's someone who's sort of floated outside of I would say, the ruined neoconservative legacy of D.C. Even though he served on Cheney's staff, he was at ground zero during the whole Scooter Libby, Karl Rove thing. Somehow he remained untainted from that. And now him and Robert Kagan actually help run this. It's a large think tank. It seems larger than the Foreign Policy Initiative, but it's called the Center for New American Security. And Michelle Flournoy is someone who she's actually the co-founder of this think tank. She was the Undersecretary of Defense Policy for Obama, so she has experience in government, and she's really plugged in there, in terms of the Obama administration. But Robert Kagan, and Eric Edelman wrote this really interesting, really long paper that was, what I would argue, it was essentially a 2016 updated version of 2000's Rebuilding America's Defenses, which is an infamous think tank document that many people may know about because it has a very prescient, predictive paragraph in there which talks about how the only way to get this transformative change at the rate that we would like is if there was a catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. And of course, a new Pearl Harbor, 9/11, happened not too long after that. So the overall theme of Rebuilding America's Defenses is not just this eerie prediction of 9/11. It's basically a full spectrum dominance plan of how to, in the void of the collapse of the Soviet Union, rebuild back up our military to almost greater than Cold War levels of military rebuilding, essentially. More troops overseas, more money. Even they actually talk about it in this paper of they're game theorying things out. So they're talking about space dominance, making sure that we're in control of the space militarily, outer space. And then also there's an interesting phrase in there that got picked up by a lot of people in the conspiracy movement, rightfully so. It's a really crazy kind of idea that's thrown out where I believe it was Don Kagan who wrote this part of the paper, who says that, and wouldn't it be awful if someone decided to use race-specific bioweapons in order to kill only a certain part of the population? And I almost feel like in the paper it's meant to imply that it could happen to like Jews in Israel or something, like a terrorist could kill, just make a race-specific bioweapon to kill Jewish people. But of course, the genes between the genetic lineage between Jews and Palestinians and Arabs in the region is actually quite mixed together. So a weapon of that sort wouldn't be effective. But they're talking about it in the paper as if it would be like a means to some kind of end. So there's all these really crazy things in that paper. So it's really interesting that this new paper is essentially just an updated, they're dusting it off, rebranding it, putting it under the name of a new think tank, not even the Foreign Policy Initiative. This think tank, I would argue, is far more in line with sort of a neoliberal Democratic Party platform foreign policy view. And this paper came out right before this event, this Hillary Clinton fundraiser. And if you read the paper and you don't even really have to read between the lines, that this paper is not just a rebranding of Rebuilding America's Defenses. It's also a full preview, spoiler alert, of Hillary Clinton's national security cabinet. I mean, it's clear that this is an early advertisement and sort of a preview of what we're going to get with Hillary Clinton's foreign policy. That these people will somehow have their hands involved in it. And I think that, Michelle Flournoy, for example, she actually seems perfectly poised to be chosen as Secretary of Defense. Now, there's part of my thinking that thinks that Hillary Clinton might go for the more like woman empowerment, female angle and choosing some of her cabinet positions. And if she does that, we might have Robert Kagan's wife, Victoria Nuland, as Secretary of State, and Michelle Flournoy, the co-founder of CNAS, as Defense Secretary. And to most Democrats and most voters and most Hillary supporters, that probably doesn't seem that bad. That seems good, actually. We should get some women in there. So I don't know. It brings up a whole lot of interesting questions, and then it also raises the sort of bizarre question of, well, why are these people so, why does the establishment, the foreign policy establishment, seem determined to all get behind Hillary Clinton and to like not be for Donald Trump?
Yeah. Well, and just to take a step back again, what we're talking about here is I don't even want to say the like return of the neocons, because they obviously never really went away. And Robbie, we've talked several times about the return of the new neocons. But what do we have now is, and again, anyone that's unaware, they are obsessed with rebranding. After what was the debacle of George W. Bush's administration, and then the term neocon became like a 4-letter word. They sort of became, they went a little quiet. They create the Foreign Policy Initiative. They start slowly kind of making inroads, and again we saw people like Robert Kagan working directly with Hillary Clinton. Obama supposedly was reading his book. They both spoke fairly highly of one another. And now all of these neocons, who also, we should add, for the most part, are all Republicans, registered Republicans. And that's what makes it so shocking. Some of there was recently a letter that was signed. I believe it was asking Congress to investigate the DNC leak. And this was signed by Elliott Abrams, Robert Kagan, Max Boot, Eric Edelman, John Yoo, all big prominent neocons. There was recently one of these articles that I saw through Amazon naming a whole bunch of other prominent, of course in the Washington Post they say, all of these, prominent Republican policymakers. And again, it's like all the same people. Kagan, Max Boot, Edelman, Richard Armitage, a whole litany of people. Most of them neocons, all saying that they're now going to support Hillary Clinton. So yeah, it's fascinating to see that they've returned now. I guess Romney was never going to work, even though many of them did sort of support Romney. I think John McCain has this weird, strained relationship with neocons, where they're sort of uneasy with him at times. So so now they're just, okay, now we're all for the Democratic Party. That's fine. Because again, and they frame it in the sense that Donald Trump is so evil that they almost have to support him, which isn't to, diminish how evil Donald Trump is or to diminish how evil Hillary Clinton is. But really fascinating. I don't know, Robbie, what do you make of this? Like this sort of shift that the neocons are doing, or why do you think, for instance, they're not going with Donald Trump? I think there's some obvious reasons. That he apparently seems to love Russia, which is anathema to neocons. But do you see anything else behind this? And I would love to just kind of get your comment on. Don't you just find it ridiculous because Trump, in so many ways, parrots a lot of neocon or the more hardcore talking points of the neocons?
No, it is. It's. On the surface, it seems like they are taking Trump's rhetoric at face value, and it's scaring them, and they feel that it's actually endangering America's standing in the world. That's if you take everything at face value. If you take what the neocons are saying at face value too, that's what it seems like they're upset about, and that's what it seems like they're doing, or it just seems like that's why they're distancing themselves from Trump and so determined to get behind Hillary Clinton. But I don't know. I mean, in making a very heavy agenda, one of the main things that I realized that the neocons were so good at was rebranding themselves. It was putting their rhetoric in such a format that it becomes intellectually acceptable among sort of not just the DC, insular bubble, but also to like the mainstream kind of more intellectual, even liberal people, like people who read The Economist and things like that. So I think that that's something the neoconservatives are incredibly good at. And I would argue that their shock and horror over Trump is actually they're using Trump as it's a kind of a convenient opportunity for them to act like Trump represents, or to simply act like what I'm trying to say is that it seems like they're
well, I'll say this. I see this as maybe even yet another example of, is Trump really just there to get Hillary Clinton elected? Because now it's like, the fact that the neocons are jumping so hard on the Clinton bandwagon, again, given all of their previous, people may not remember this, but Eric Edelman, I believe when he was Under Secretary for Defense Policy, criticized Hillary Clinton really quite, viciously. And at the time, people, the media was almost like, this is just kind of, a little bit too much. And now suddenly he couldn't speak highly enough of her. So, it does seem like that Trump is now just the perfect excuse for all of them to, we got to go with Hillary. And of course now they're all going to get nice jobs within government again.
Yeah. I think what's happening here is just on a really basic level, it's really alarming to think that the neocons are so comfortable with Hillary Clinton, because I don't think that it's just, I think that we need to stop thinking about this. I'm not saying you're thinking about it this way, but I think in general, when we're looking at this, the idea that they're so scared of Trump, I think is almost a distraction. It's a red herring. And I really think that this is an indicator that Hillary Clinton doesn't just have hawkish foreign policy. She's not just going to be more hawkish than Obama. She's actually going to be somehow a representation or a manifestation of what I would argue is the new neocon foreign policy platform, one that maybe might even be worse than Bush. We honestly can't say. That was the last time we had a foreign policy presidency that was completely represented by a neocon clique in Washington, D.C. So now we'll have another one, but it's this 2016 updated version of it. Obama, at the very least, tried to put a mixture of different people in his administration that weren't just all neoconservative or weren't just these sort of neoliberal foreign policy hawks. But from what I can see, it seems like Hillary Clinton is completely comfortable doing that, and the neocons are completely comfortable with her. And I think obviously there's a lot of reasons why that's bad. First and foremost, the idea that Hillary Clinton is completely comfortable escalating the conflict in Ukraine. And, it's something that I don't think most people are paying attention to on a day-to-day basis. It's been going on for a while. But, it is true that the United States has some kind of – they really, really, really don't want Russia to have any kind of influence there. We've already – the foreign policy mindset here in the United States is because – Putin already annexed part of Crimea and, is still has troops and proxy forces in Ukraine, that it's an unacceptable situation, and that there's a lot of people here still looking at it like, well, of course we need to send weapons to the Ukrainian army and fund them, because, we need a Europe whole, free, and at peace. That was a post-Cold War vision that we still have. and that's still very important to us. And what's funny to me about that is Europeans care so much less really about what's happening in Ukraine than these American foreign policy makers do. They act like it's there to protect Europeans and it's there to protect the integrity of Europe. But I mean, like Germany and several other countries are on. They don't want to escalate it either. I mean, they understand how much of a risk it is.
Ukraine now just seems basically just what will become a de facto NATO country with NATO bases. They won't. I doubt that Ukraine will ever officially become a member of NATO, but they'll be like Georgia or Azerbaijan or something, where for all intents and purposes they're NATO, and that'll really be right on Russia's door. I don't even know. I mean, this again goes back to this sort of insane view that the neocons they constantly talk about the world order. What do they even hope to accomplish by taking control of Ukraine or escalating the conflict in Ukraine? Can they expect? Just again, it's a tough question to answer, Robbie. But what do you think they're really they think they can get out of this, or is it just chaos?
I don't think. This is sort of the one of the hardest to answer questions, honestly, because I think that ultimately it's less important to them what the actual end result will be of us meddling and interfering and funding the Ukrainian army, or just meddling in that part of the region of the world will be. I don't think that they, not to say that they don't care. I definitely think a lot of these people have a sociopathic mindset. But I think it's more important to them to make sure that America doesn't back down in situations like that, and that if they feel that Russia is somehow intimidating the U.S. or making us back down, that is completely unacceptable to them. And they want us to stand up and show Russia that we cannot be messed with. And I think that it almost sounds childlike to say it that way, but I think that ultimately that's what's most important to them. And they already see us losing this ideological battle of America being the world superpower because of what's already happened in Ukraine. To them, we're already in a really weak position. And they feel that we need to, at the very least, we need to reassert ourselves over there. Because if we continue to back down in situations like this, and I'm using their language right now. I hope people listening don't think this is my opinion. I'm just trying to relay what they think. They really, really feel that America's role is to always, in every situation, stand up as the king of the hill and say, no, you cannot mess with us. Like, you cannot meddle here. We'll do something horrible back to you. Essentially, I think that's what they always want the position of America to be. And I think that they've seen even just the rhetorical withdrawal from that sort of ideological position by the Obama administration as a huge threat to them and sort of their standing in Washington, D.C.
Mm. Yeah, and that's something that I've definitely really learned more so having watched your film series is the fact that it's not even necessarily that it needs to be true, but the perception has to be there. And they are so obsessed with the perception of America. It doesn't really matter if we're totally in debt, massive crime rate, social and economic inequality. It doesn't matter if, we have the highest, cancer rate and all of these other things that you would never immediately associate with a powerful Western nation. But so long as we are perceived as the world police and as the sort of arbiters of wrong and right, then that's fine. And that really is like what they're so obsessed with. They talk, incessantly about the world order, about controlling all these things, about how like international law and those things don't really matter, because we can break them all the time. And they never really seem to have like a dominant ideology, or there's no like end goal. You know, I guess under Bush it was terrorism. You know, we have to defeat Al Qaeda. They seem less concerned with ISIS only when it becomes like a hot button sort of flavor of the week issue. Then suddenly it's all about ISIS and stuff. But you know, you in I think it's in part 3 of your series, Robbie, you had this great video with Jamie Kirchick where he doesn't even really have an explanation for how to defeat ISIS. He's just, well, we'll kill him. You know, and then it's like, but what about the void of Assad? Well, there's a lot of things we have to deal with, you know, but let's just kill them first, and then we'll deal with the rest of it later. So it's like they have no actual real goal in mind other than, and it sounds very like cheesy, but like world domination, you know, like
yeah. And it's not even, I mean, and then when you think the term world domination, you think almost like a game of Risk or something. But I don't even think it's that, because that's more, I think that's more old school sort of U.S. foreign policy thinking, is thinking about it like that. I mean, if I were to take a guess, and I can't say this 100% sure, but I think that the United States foreign policy makers have already played almost every conceivable game you could play, say if you had a board of Risk in front of them decades and decades ago. They've already gamed out every scenario. So what we're operating in now is more of an ideological struggle where it's that we always need to assert ourselves, and because we are the world's dominant superpower, and if we don't, we will lose that position. It'll be a quote unquote new type of world order, you know, that Robert Kagan talks about. So yeah.
Yeah. One where they perceive it would be Russia. That would be, I guess, dominating us. I guess, you know, I mean, if anyone is sort of getting tired of the Russia bashing, don't worry, because once the election actually starts, full swing, it'll all be about China. Because that's always the evil enemy in every election. But Robbie, getting back to this sort of these prominent neocons that are not only all endorsing Hillary Clinton, and we should point out too, they were doing this prior to recent events. But now with this sort of, they're also really endorsing this narrative of Russia being, and when they say Russia, they mean Putin. They don't mean anything else. They mean that Putin himself ordered the hack of the DNC. He's the only one really that matters in Russia. And you know, they're going after him and all this stuff. And they link this to say that, oh, well, and of course Putin did this for his BFF Donald Trump. And this shows how evil Trump is. What is your take on this? Because I'm like sort of two mindsets when it comes to this. One of them, I was listening to Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's podcast. It's a great podcast, A Power Vertical, which I would encourage everyone to listen to. It is obviously a pro-NATO, CIA, anti-Russian podcast, but it is very good. And Mark Galeotti, who is again, it fits into that sort of line of thinking, but he is a really interesting guy. He's very smart. His writing is very good. He's great analysis on things. And he was sort of they were talking about that, and then he mentioned something that I thought was really interesting. And he was saying, sort of talking about Putin's support of other, like alternative, in air quotes, or right-wing politicians out there. And he talks about, Putin is always talking about how he loves Marine Le Pen in France. And that's not really about, if Marine Le Pen or if the National Front Party got into any sort of power within France, it's not like that would necessarily make things easier for Putin. It would probably on some level, but that really what it's about is bringing chaos to the EU. That if Marine Le Pen ever came to some sort of cabinet position or was powerful in the French parliament, or even, say, ascended to prime minister, that ultimately that would weaken the EU. And that's why Putin supported Brexit. Was not out of some sort of, we should all be, like that's the narrative in the alternative media, is that, Putin is helping us fight the New World Order, so that's why he supports Brexit. But if it is, say, about creating chaos and weakening the EU, could that be a reason that Putin favors Trump? Is that he because I don't buy this Putin likes Trump because he, respects him or thinks he's smart, or to go the kind of full-blown conspiracy culture thing that, Trump is really a truther. He understands the New World Order and what's at stake. And so does Putin, even though he's never said anything about it. Never mentioned anything that he must know about 9/11. But, Putin is really a truther, and Putin also wants to help us fight the New World Order. So what do you make of this whole Russian angle? Because I don't even really see that there's all that much evidence that Russia even did it.
Well, I mean, I think at a very basic level, this all stems from this idea that Trump is an authoritarian, strong man, alpha male, and that Putin is also. So they must love each other, right?
Right. Yeah.
Honestly, that I feel like that's where it started. It started with this sort of, they seem similar to each other. Let's start, making lists of all the similarities between their rhetoric, their style, their swagger. I don't see, Trump. I mean, Putin. I don't see them as being even similar on that level. No.
Trump is a fat, out of shape, balding, skin cancer,
he's more of a typical arrogant American narcissist. Putin to me seems like he's not. I mean, yeah, he takes pictures of himself with his shirt off on horses and stuff, but he doesn't. His personality seems very different to me. I mean, really, really different type of personality and just style. So it's interesting to me that it's, if you just find rhetorical similarities, I guess, without seeing them talk, then maybe I guess you can pull some kind of comparison. I mean, if you notice, nobody's been, if there's so many similarities between Trump and Putin, you don't see any videos showing these similarities, I think that's kind of would illustrate how they're really actually not that similar. But I guess my argument against this, just going back to this idea that Trump is some kind of, that Putin prefers Trump, or that Putin, wants him to win, maybe to create chaos in the United States or something like that. My argument against that would be that I think that Putin has done incredibly well for himself ever since the neocons and the foreign policy hawks and the old Cold Warriors in the United States started poking him. And I don't think that if our side didn't do that, I honestly think Putin might already be out of office. I think he already might have in some ways been ousted. And I say that because I think that this posturing the United States has done towards him, it's giving him an incredible amount of attention and power. He feeds off of it. I mean, it's kind of like what Lawrence Wilkerson says in part 2 of A Very Heavy Agenda. Putin's inviting us back to the Cold War. Well, let's accept the offer, kind of like mockingly. That's what we've done. It's like, it's just, I think that Putin understands on some level that he needs this sort of neocon hysteria against him to maintain his popularity in Russia. The more heightened this Cold War rhetoric gets here, the more popular he'll be there. Just like the more popular, hawkish, anti-Russian people will get here. So I don't buy into that idea that somehow that Putin would want Trump. I mean, it may create more chaos in the United States, but I think it might actually lose Putin some ground in his country, because let's say Trump actually does follow through with his weird wild card, and that's how I look at Trump, as a wild card. Absolutely nothing he says can be trusted.
No.
So, but if let's just say that his Russia's rhetoric can be trusted, then that'll actually not be very good for Putin to have a president of the United States who doesn't really give much of a crap about him and wants to be his friend. I mean, I see that almost like it's kryptonite to Putin's power, but I don't know. Maybe you have a different take.
No, actually, I hadn't even really looked at it that way, but as you were saying that, I just started thinking in my head, I think that's actually a really astute analysis, because I think you're right on so many levels. Is that, and let me say, I'm not trying to necessarily bash Putin and everything. I think there is something to be said for having a balance to whatever NATO or Western dominance. I think I think it's good in a way. If we're just sort of looking at this in a logical, this is how the world is going to operate this way anyway. It's better to have two it would be better if there were lots of if there were enough superpowers, then there would be no superpowers. You know what I mean? But I think that when Putin does get in trouble politically, and there are political issues in Russia. Now some of these are externally caused, but nonetheless, it does help him. It helps him, I think, to have this sort of, as you said, this sort of strong, aggressive foreign policy coming out of the West and NATO. Because, I think Putin is now in a position, and I think even, the most hardcore, anti-Putin people would admit this, where I don't think he'll ever lose an election. I don't think he really has to rig elections all that much, if at all, really, to be honest. I think he is actually that popular. You get outside of Moscow and St. Petersburg, where you have, of course, there's always going to be that liberal elite. People love him. Even like people that are probably suffering because of some of the policies of Russia, be they economic or whatnot, still support him. So yeah, I think that, and I think you're right too. I think it would sort of it would be like lame to Putin's sort of persona if he was shaking Trump's hand at like a G12 meeting or something like that. If they seemed like they were buddy, I think that would weaken Trump. And also too, I mean, it's just I think at another level, I think Trump, and I hate using this term, but I think Putin is just trolling Trump. That, if he were to get elected, well, he knows he can do whatever the hell he wants to. He could invade Ukraine, and what's Trump going to do? Nothing. He's not going to say anything. He could do whatever he wanted. But I don't know. I think you have something there in terms of, I don't even know if that's really what Putin's ultimate goals are. I don't think that Russia really has any goals of empire, not in the conventional sense, and not in the sense that the Soviet Union did. I think they're more concerned with just sort of maintaining the general order and ensuring that they won't be completely surrounded on all sides by NATO. Yeah. So, I think it behooves them to have an adversary. I think Absolutely. They need something like that. And I think you're right. I think that with Putin's star has only risen with the rise of all of these neocons complaining about him. Yeah. It gives him every excuse to do whatever the hell he wants.
Yeah, I mean, look at, I don't know if this is a good example, but I mean, when Obama got into office, they had this sort of Russia reset, idea that they were going to start a new accord with Russia, a new channel of communication, a new type of relationship than the Bush administration had. And I mean, I would argue during that period of time where that was still going, there was hardly any, I don't think Putin was all that powerful, at least on the world stage. I'm sure he was in Russia domestically, but I mean, I think that this is what's given him the power on the world stage is our rhetoric. But, and I think on some level, I'm sure he knows that, and he's getting the same thing out of it that we're getting out of it. I mean, and this is where it brings us back to that sort of Cold War, bipolar world mindset that Robert Kagan talks about, how the world, was somehow more stable when we were in a bipolar world.
That's right. He's always talking about that.
So I think that on some level, even though Russia is not communist anymore, just having another big superpower to volley off of and to give it back to us, where we give it to them and they give it back to us, back and forth, that dynamic just by itself creates an incredible opportunity for the neocons, here in this country to sell more wars and to put Americans at a more, I guess, patriotic, hawkish, mindset. Look at Ahmadinejad, for example. When he left, it's almost like you don't really hear much about, Iran anymore here. I mean, you do, but not in the same way, because I feel like Ahmadinejad was giving to us exactly what we wanted an Iranian leader to do, is to act like that, to saber rattle with us.
Deny the Holocaust.
Yeah. And once that stopped, I don't really feel like we have the same opportunity, we being the sort of foreign policy establishment in the United States, to push on Iran. So it's almost, in a weird way, it is like a game. It's like a intimidation game, where the actual nuts and bolts and the military action is almost like it comes last on the list. So I don't know. In terms of Trump, the DNC leak hack that it was done by Russia to help Trump. It really is. We have a different opinion on Snowden than I'm sure some other people do, but it really is a similar thing where, Snowden's a Russian spy. It's coming from the same place, because the neocons tried to paint that as some kind of all these leaks are benefiting Vladimir Putin. That's how they saw it, because that's how myopic and narrow-minded their framework is. And I think that's where all it's coming from now. It's like, oh, this helps Trump and hurts Hillary, and Trump is friends with Putin, so this must be, some kind of Russian, the Russians might have, were behind this. But then, of course, now they're saying that there's forensic investigation showing that it has Russian fingerprints. What I think is odd is, why do those forensic investigations come out? There's one I was seeing on this website called Crowdsource, which kind of had this really weird Bellingcat-ish flavor to it, where it was like, this rush to do this hasty forensic, internet, this data trail investigation of this leak. But why does it always have to be? Why can't we actually wait for a proper, fully, just an actual investigation to take place? That's always the interesting thing about these, is when MH17 got shot out of the sky.
Instantly.
We immediately saw that we already had proof, even though we couldn't release it, about that the Russians shot it down with a Buk missile system. And then the most comprehensive, examination of it was in the form of a Bellingcat, Google-funded, independent bloggers investigation. That's just
using
incredibly,
YouTube and Google Earth.
It's incredibly bizarre, and honestly, that was what we were left with as the public, as this is the definitive investigation of MH17. The actual, the Dutch investigation got far less attention in the U.S. press than the Bellingcat thing did.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
If you look into the Dutch one, which is essentially is Russia did it, there are lots of issues even that they bring up that are odd. They in the Dutch one, they make a big deal. Well, why were they even allowing for commercial airliners to be flying over a war zone? That's never ever happened.
Well, that's to me, that's the, I think that raises a really interesting point, because if you really want to think about sort of the Machiavellian nature of some of these policy makers and strategists, I really don't think it would be that difficult for them to have Ukrainian air traffic controllers allow a commercial airline to fly into that airspace, knowing that somehow a Russian separatist would be tempted to shoot it down. I think that's completely within a logical realm, similar to how when Assad supposedly launched this sarin gas attack against his own people, we knew that it was coming somehow for weeks in advance in the U.S. press. It was like they're mixing sarin gas in this Aleppo facility. Is he going to cross the red line or not? We have intelligence that Assad may be prepared to launch a chemical weapons attack against some people. I mean, call me crazy, but I don't even understand how you would have that level of intelligence unless you were actually in a position where you could be able to stop it from happening. So,
and if you did have that, would you be telling CNN?
Exactly, right?
I mean, come on. It's like Spycraft 101. It's just, I don't even understand the point of that.
I mean, at the very least, they're putting the pieces, they're setting up the pieces for an inevitable kind of domino effect, I guess I would call it. And, you know, with this, they've already, you know, set the pieces. I mean, I don't know what the investigation's going to conclude with this, but I mean, from what I've seen, I've seen tech bloggers who don't have this sort of anti-Russian confirmation bias, because I would argue most people in this country and in the West, by default at this point, do have some kind of anti-Russian confirmation bias, just from by osmosis through the mainstream media. But when you look at these people who have been skeptical of sort of this anti-Russian confirmation bias have been like, the fingerprints in here, you know, there's things that almost seem like too obvious that they're from Russia. So, you know, the FSB would have to be morons to leave this in here. So, which is interesting because then immediately after that, I saw a Daily Beast article that was sourced from 3 anonymous intelligence officials from the U.S. government saying, well, actually, Russia wanted us to know they did it.
Yeah.
That's why they left such obvious fingerprints. Yeah. And it gets creepy because it's like this rhetoric just keeps going back and forth forever. They'll always move the goalposts and find some new way to spin it. I mean, it really is cartoonish Cold War era rhetoric. I really think it is, but you know.
Well, you know, Robbie, I want to continue talking a little bit more about this hack or whatever it is, and this leak and some of the Russian stuff. And of course, there was just a massive hack of Russian government agencies that nobody is talking about. But we're getting close to the break, and quickly, Robbie, where can people go if they're interested in the stuff that we're talking about? I know that they would love to check out your film series, A Very Heavy Agenda. So quickly, tell everybody before we hit the break, where can they go to get a copy of your film?
You can watch it streaming, or you can download it, or get DVDs of it at averyheavyagenda.com.
Excellent, and I would encourage everybody to go out and either get a copy or stream it or whatever, and then of course you can go and listen to all of me and Robbie's podcasts on this topic, because we've talked about it quite a bit. But you know, as I was saying, I do want to kind of continue talking about this hack and the leak and all this stuff, because I think there's you know, I know it's like nobody in the alternative media, like, you know, everybody is against elections. Nobody votes. Nobody cares. But of course, everybody is talking about them. And they matter in, at least in one sense, that we're all obsessed about them and that they consume a lot of time. But I think in some of these examples, and particularly with this DNC leak or hack or whatever it is, I think there is a larger story behind this. And of course, elections do matter because we might have Hillary Clinton running the White House, and we'd have Slick Willie running around. I guess he would be called the first man, first gentleman, or first husband. I think that's what they say in the TV show Veep. So these things do matter, and I think they are important. So it is worth looking into these sorts of events and things like that. And I would also love to kind of after the break, Robbie, get your take on the idea that Hillary Clinton might have been behind this hack. But anyway, we will be back with my guest, Robbie Martin, and stay tuned.
Welcome to the world's meeting place. American.
It's practically narcotic.
Freedom.
Oh, yes, I like very much.
Radio.
You're an American institution.
American Freedom Radio. Coming to you live from New York City. Your host, Pierce Redmond.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Porkins Policy Radio. I am your host, Pierce Redmond, and joining me, of course, is Robbie Martin. But quickly, again, before we get started, if you like what you hear from me or anyone else here at AFR, then please consider becoming a member, a contributor to AFR. We are trying to expand and have a TV component to all of this, so you could see as well as hear my lovely voice every week on Tuesdays. We really only need a couple extra $100 to make this happen. So if you can, please do that. If it's just $1, that helps tremendously. I can't stress that enough. If everybody that listened to AFR gave $1 a month, the stuff we could do with that. So please, if you can, please do help and donate. But, as I was, saying, we are joined by my good friend, Robbie Martin. And, before Robbie, we were before the break, we were talking about this DNC leak and all the sort of ins and outs of that. But I wanted to kind of continue that a little bit because there was this bizarre letter that was written, again, signed by all these prominent neocons, urging Congress to investigate the DNC leak and basically to show that Russia was behind all of this. And this is pretty crazy for a number of reasons. One is that anytime there is a hack, it's always the Russians or the Chinese. There's never any question of, well, could this be another government out there, a friendly government even? And all that we have found out in the past several years, the NSA leaks and things like that, it's pretty obvious that the U.S. government is offensively spying on everybody. It's at a point now where you even have, the FBI director putting tape over his webcam on his computer. That can't just be because of the Russians. You have the capacity.
Mark Zuckerberg too.
Mark Zuckerberg, yeah, of course, yeah, and he ought to know, CIA, Facebook. And I think it's at a point now where the NSA can turn on the microphone of your iPhone or any phone, even if it's off. So obviously the U.S. has lots of offensive hacking capabilities. And as I was saying right before the break, I was just checking out before we started talking, but there is one of the largest cyber attacks in Russian history. Or I don't know if that's entirely, that might be a little bit overblown. That's some of the reports saying, but this is huge. This is a meticulously coded, sophisticated virus has been found on computer networks of at least 20 major Russian agencies and organizations. And this is coming from intelnews.org. And this is pretty crazy. They supposedly the FSB has said that once installed, the virus gave its handler control of the infected computer system. It permitted an outside hacker to turn on a computer's microphone or camera and capture screenshots. It also stealthily installed keylogging software, thus allowing an outside party to monitor keyboard strokes on an infected system. And based on its functions, the malicious software seems to be designed to conduct deep surveillance on infected computers and their physical surroundings. This was also coordinated and planned professionally. Now, if you were to take that and, switch out FSB and put in NSA and, U.S. Agencies and organizations, of course it would be Russia. I bring this up only to say this happens all the time. It's not just, and it makes it sound like the U.S. is constantly being hacked, by, I guess, the Russians and the Chinese and maybe the Iranians. But, Robbie, what do you make of this letter urging Congress to investigate this? Because we were saying just off air that it would be a complete circus. It would be a show trial. And I guess the importance of this, because this would be a first. I doubt it's going to happen, but it could. Oh,
you still there?
No, lose your. Oh yeah, we're still here.
Oh no, sorry. This letter is incredible because, PNAC is gone. It's closed down. Foreign Policy Initiative, I would argue, is almost kind of just a symbol at this point. I don't really think they're that active. What seems like what's happening is a lot of these more savvy neocons, these people from these think tanks, Robert Kagan, Eric Edelman, Elliot Cohen, for example, they're putting out these letters almost in an independent fashion now, and it doesn't matter what platform they're putting them out from. All that matters is that their names are attached to them because they understand that people in the foreign policy community, people in government take them seriously. I think Robert Kagan already passed a kind of a threshold by writing that series of editorials in the Washington Post calling Trump a fascist. That was a risky thing, I think, for him to do in a way, because I don't think he knew for sure that the Republican community and the GOP would not find that extremely upsetting, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, they're calling their potential nominee a fascist. And of course, this is the same man who would have freaked out if he was called Bush a fascist. Or
whose family, is basically funded by corporations, the arms industries, to write trumped up reports about, how successful the surge is in Iraq or something, which, by its very definition, they are, fascist. It's rich from him saying that, but not to say that Trump isn't a fascist. I think he definitely is.
Yeah, he has very domestic, fascist sounding rhetoric. But I would argue, and this is something I've talked about before with you, is that to really have that whole, a real authentic fascism, you need almost more of like a world domination kind of a messianic bent to it. And I don't think Trump has displayed that yet, although he is a total narcissist and he has megalomaniacal qualities. That's something that he has not done, at least rhetorically. But just going back to what you said about the hack, I think that this is something that Abby and I have been talking about for a long time, this idea of the war on cyber terror, the war on hacking. It seems like after the war on terror, there was already a lot of signaling and think tank writings basically talking about this new frontier, this new battlefront, this new type of warfare that the United States is going to have to be fighting and at the cutting edge of, which is cyber warfare. There's a lot of stuff actually written out there that you can find. Some of it's even written by Richard Clarke. He was at the tip of the spear of a lot of this fear-mongering in the 90s, that there's going to be some kind of catastrophic cyber terror event that's going to affect our society in a detrimental way, where we might have nationwide blackouts for days. Almost kind of like what the people were talking about in the 90s, this fear of an EMP bomb, but it being done over the internet, that our infrastructure would somehow be crippled by a massive cyber attack. Now, what's funny to me about that is, just like the war on terror, of course, it's the United States pushing most of this technology and developing most of it, in a more sophisticated way than any other country that we know of. And one example of that was Stuxnet in Iran, which was a cyber weapon designed to disrupt their uranium enrichment process, which would actually very subtly change the azimuth on their centrifuges to the point where they would spend months and months of work enriching this uranium, only to find that the azimuth had been modified by a computer virus that had basically destroyed their enrichment process. A very sophisticated virus, unprecedented really in the history of cyber warfare. And, for years it was speculated, well, this was either the United States or Israel that did it, because it's so sophisticated. It would have, had to have been an intelligence agency, and also the target, that it was Iran's nuclear program. But what was funny is it actually got revealed in a New York Times article years later that it wasn't either one individually. It was actually both. The United States and Israel had developed this cyber weapon together as sort of a joint Mossad I don't know if it was the CIA, but Obama was actually directly involved in sort of authorizing its launch. He was very proud of it. It was actually one of the proudest moments of his presidency. And they sort of let the public know this in the form of a anonymous leak, but it was more like a brag if you actually read the thing. So, you know, it is laughable that we're sitting here acting like Russia is somehow trying to destroy our democracy and blaming them for this DNC leak. Because ultimately, what does the DNC leak really even show? All it does is it hurts Hillary Clinton's moral standing. It shows that she is more of a liar. It shows that the DNC was working with her before she got the nomination when they shouldn't have been to help destroy Bernie Sanders. It doesn't,
which is obvious, of course.
Yeah,
you know, I mean, it's like the DNC or the RNC always picks a surefire winner. Like that's nothing new at all. Like you know what? I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to throw this at you also. Recently, Chuck Ocelli was talking to J.P. Sotilli, and J.P. Sotilli had a really interesting theory that what if this was just Clinton and the DNC that leaked it? You know, because the other thing is what's really in these emails and whatnot. It's like you said, it's just that they favored Hillary Clinton. They didn't like Bernie Sanders. Now, this was pretty apparent to anybody that actually paid attention to that race. And, you know, I'm sure and Sotilli was saying, obviously Bernie Sanders said, Wasserman Schultz has got to go, you know? Okay, fine. So we'll get rid of her. We'll just speed this up. We'll have this phony leak. We'll make her look bad. She resigns. And then, the same day Hillary Clinton hires her? You know, surprise, surprise. Like, I don't see I know that it's been floated by people that, you know, in these leaks, there's like incriminating stuff, like opposition research on Donald Trump, that shows his ties to Russia. And that's why the Russians hacked him. And I mean, Robbie, you followed the Ukraine quite a bit. Have you seen this stuff that like Yanukovych is funding Trump?
Yeah.
I mean, like I just don't. I mean, I'm sure there is opposition research in there. Why maybe they're saving it to, you know, maybe they're going to wait a little bit, you know, and drip it out. I mean, that WikiLeaks has done that before. Maybe that's the thing, but I just don't. I don't know. I can't really believe it. But what do you make of that? This like Russia, you know, there's secrets in the emails about Russia.
I don't know. That's a little bit. I think it's hard for me to speak on that because I think that this is the weird thing is a lot of these, you know, there's a mixture of money. This money trail gets really mixed together, and it's not easy to say, oh, you know, Trump is getting mostly Russian money, or you know, Hillary is getting mostly, you know, Ukrainian oligarch money or whatever, because you can find articles like there's an article in The Nation written by Mark Ames from 2008, which is all about how while McCain was speaking out one side of his mouth about how we need to stand up to Russia, about what they did in Georgia and all this stuff, and he was taking all this aggressive anti-Putin stances in 2008, he was getting heavily funded by some major Russian oligarchs who actually were directly like involved in Putin's rise to power. So you have all these bizarre, you know, seemingly conflict of interest and all this stuff. So at a certain point, it almost seems like the argument of, well, how many Russian investments does he have, or, you know, how many, you know, or et cetera. I feel like, at least for me, it's hard for me to, you know, to investigate things that way and say, well, that's, you know, that person's bread is being buttered by that, you know, particular government, so that must mean they're in the pocket of that government. Sometimes I'll find that that's actually, it doesn't necessarily give me the answer. So I mean, that's as much as I can speak to that, actually. But what do you think about it?
I don't know. It seems possible. I know that there's been a lot Trump I know that Russians in the past have propped up a lot of Trump's businesses, or that he's had a lot of Russian investors. There's also it's not coming. I can't think of it right now off the top of my head. I know there is a Russian mobster figure that was connected with Trump back in New York real estate back in the days, and this was a guy who had direct ties to the Russian mafia, which it's no secret that Russian mob is connected with the Kremlin. But I mean that's not that every Russian mobster is. I don't know. I find it a little hard to believe that there's I just don't really think that even if why would the DNC have that kind of opposition research, or why would it be, if they do have stuff like that, I assume that Hillary Clinton has access to it. I doubt that she's telling that to Debbie Wasserman Schultz or anyone else. I mean, it doesn't, all it really seems in the emails is just they hate Bernie. That they obviously favored Clinton.
Yeah, I mean, there's some other stuff in there about how Hispanics are more susceptible to storytelling and things like that.
They're not good. Yeah.
So I mean, my only argument against the idea that she might have, that Hillary's campaign had something to do with leaking this is that it seemed to actually really hurt her in the first few days of that convention. Like the news media headlines were dominated by negative stuff, especially about Schultz. But I mean, obviously they found a way to throw her under the bus when they needed to, and then just immediately bring her back in, which is actually kind of funny. There was actually a funny moment. I don't know how much do you watch much CNN or Fox News when all this crap is going on?
I watch it only around this time.
Okay, because there was a really funny moment on CNN when I got to my sister's place in New York after this Hillary Clinton event I went to. It was like the night before the DNC, like the first official night. You know how they show the convention hall all empty and on that little panel sort of on the balcony talking? Mm-hmm. So it was that, and they were all talking about how Debbie Wasserman Schultz, obviously, they was right for them to make her step down. The Democratic Party would be wise to completely disassociate themselves from her. It was almost like they had gotten different talking points. Like they had gotten talking points from like a couple hours ago when it was like the Democratic Party for sure is going to throw her under the bus. She's done, right? Mm. And as they're talking about this, putting out these talking points, she's, she did bad. They should get rid of her. All of a sudden, you see them cut to a shot of Debbie Wasserman Schultz walking through the convention floor, being given a tour of it. And Don Lemon's like, we have breaking news that Debbie Wasserman Schultz is being escorted through the convention floor, and we don't really understand what's happening. But let's cut to the shot of this. And they cut to the shot of her walking through, and it's almost like they're probably getting fed different talking points in real time that like she's not going to be completely kicked out. They just don't know what to do or how to cover it. They're all totally baffled and confused. It's like they're naturally confused too, because they got this sort of different memo, or they just got an older one. So I just thought it was just interesting to see that you could see that machinery kind of glitching out in real time. Because of course, not to say that Trump isn't an establishment candidate, but CNN and all these other networks are very much, carrying water for Hillary Clinton most of the time. Oddly, Fox News is still in a lot of ways, which is a very fascinating thing to see, is that Fox News is actually for the first time ever is no longer like a lockstep Republican, get behind the candidate network.
I don't know why Fox News isn't jumping on the leak. You'd think that this would be like, every fucking day would be Hannity and,
Well, Benghazi was like what they talked about for years straight. So, no, you're absolutely right. It's hilarious. It's hilariously glaring that, I mean, if anything, Trump's candidacy and how fast he's risen, at the very least, it's revealed all these bizarre contradictions that we were never really able to see before, like actually like rise to the top. Like, for instance, Roger Ailes getting outed for all the years of sexual harassment, decades, going back to like the 60s. Like, it doesn't seem like it's a coincidence that this is happening right now to me. And I don't mean that this is, some kind of blackmailing by the Trump campaign or anything, but it does just Trump's, him shattering the Republican Party. I still think we're seeing the repercussions and the ripple effects of that. And and Ailes' outing, I almost feel like, is just another one of those. I mean, there's been stories written recently that behind the halls of Fox News, there's people who do not speak to each other anymore. That there's actual like huge rifts inside the company where like everybody hates each other. Like there's just this incredibly tense energy. So I don't know. I mean, it's you're totally right though. It is very interesting that they're not talking about the DNC leak all the time. You would think that would be, great coverage for them. Really easy coverage.
Which I guess I'm sure there are people out there that maybe even listening to this thinking, oh, well, but you see that, that just proves that Trump is the alternative. That he's so dangerous that even Fox News is going to, support Hillary Clinton. But I don't know. I think there's something to be said for the sort of Trump is like an alternative figure. But at the end of the day, I mean, I think it like not enough, not really, if he was really an alternative figure, he would have never gotten a Republican nomination. Whereas you do see like, I guess it still sort of surprises me that you have the alternative of Bernie Sanders, supposedly. He does get ousted. And the shenanigans that went on at the DNC are very similar, if not identical, to the shenanigans that went on the last time that Ron Paul ran. All sorts of weird delegates, disappearing and counties going one way or the other, and the rules at the committee changing at the last second. Very similar. I don't know quite how Trump got there, unless you do kind of go back to that idea that Trump really, that this is just sort of this whole thing is theatrics. All presidential elections are theatrics, and Trump is just the newest actor to come in here, and that this is all just a game. That's why the GOP is letting this happen.
I think you're right to a certain extent. I mean, my only counter to that is there was a weirdness at the RNC this time where it honestly felt like almost like, you're like the unpopular kid who tries to have a party and everybody says they're going to come and nobody shows up or something. I mean, it was strange how the only nominee, not even just president, like the only person to come, no previous GOP presidential candidate showed up, first of all.
Dole, yeah.
But Bob Dole was only a nominee. He was literally the only dude to show his face there. And I mean, when you watched it on television, it was empty. I mean, it was actually really odd to think that this is not just – it almost seems like the Republican Party is willing to lose this election to save the party, if that makes any sense. Yeah. I mean, it's actually what Dan Senor says in part 3 of A Very Heavy Agenda, that they've already decided, even let's just say that – maybe only the neocons and these real hardcore foreign policy hawks are drifting towards Hillary. But the Republican Party as a whole, the establishment GOP, I don't think that they want Hillary to win, but I also don't think that they want Donald Trump to win. Because I think that even they have decided that this is an opportunistic moment to rebrand their own party. I mean, on some level, you have to believe that even some of these more race-baiting, kind of dog-whistling GOP candidates, they know how dangerous that stuff is, and they know that it's almost like would be the smart thing to do for the Republican Party to tamp down the racism, the homophobia. I mean, yeah, it gets them votes, but it's dangerous, and it's actually – I think that it's going to put them on the wrong side of history. What I'm saying is society evolves. Gay marriage is legal now. Supreme Court ruled it. They're fighting a losing battle if they're going to keep trying. If the GOP is going to keep trying to associate itself with those kinds of, more bigoted points of view. So I think this also gives them an opportunity to try to move past that too, and disassociate themselves from Donald Trump, and then in turn act like, oh, all that bigotry, all that Islamophobia, that's all Trump. That's not us. And it's actually a really smart thing, I think. I mean, it's really disingenuous and stupid for them to act like they're different from that, because they're not. But it would be idiotic for them not to use this opportunity, really, because ultimately Hillary Clinton, in a lot of ways is more of a Republican than Donald Trump is. So, but
for sure, yeah.
But again, I need to stress that this does not mean Donald Trump is in any way a good candidate, or that he's going to be good for the country or pull away from these things. I see him as a total wild card, cannot be trusted in any way. At least, if you want to say something positive about Hillary Clinton, at least you can be sure that she will take some of these more hawkish positions. We know what she will probably do. So there's some kind of safety, put it in quotes, of voting her in. So,
I was listening to an interview with Jeffrey Tucker, who is about as libertarian as you can get. And he despises Donald Trump. And he actually had an interesting point when he was talking about this, and he was saying, and he obviously despises Hillary Clinton, as we all should. But he was saying, with someone like Hillary Clinton, or with any sort of establishment candidate, there is a check when you think about the fact that they are beholden to the special interests. They would not be there. Hillary Clinton wouldn't be where she is without Wall Street, without, military industrial complex, some of these, arms manufacturers in Wall Street. So when she gets into office, she's not going to be able to do everything that she wants to do, because she's going to have to pay back those people. Whereas someone with a Trump, who it seems that even without any money, he's still doing fairly well. He isn't beholden to anyone. So he really could do some of these crazy, ridiculous things. And maybe, we can shift gears and talk about this a little bit, because I find it interesting. We have so many people in the alt media, and I find a lot of these so-called libertarians that support Trump or who are of the libertarian bend, and he talks about that he wouldn't allow for Ford to move a plant to Mexico, and that seen as we're saving our jobs. Break that down. A president who has no power whatsoever to dictate something like that to a private company would force it, physically stop them from moving to Mexico? That's a horrifying sort of notion. So any libertarians out there that think that this is a good thing, that's crazy and antithetical. And I say this as someone who I've said before voted for Gary Johnson. And was even thinking about voting for him again this time around, and not out of that I really, think strongly about voting. But in New York City, if you don't vote, you'll never hear the end of it. And I just didn't want to have to be that person on Election Day. But Robbie, what do you make of Marvin Bush saying that he's going to vote for Gary Johnson, and also Jeb Bush saying that he might vote for Gary Johnson? What?
I was just gonna. Well, I don't know if you've already heard, but Stephen Hayes of the Weekly Standard said he's seriously looking at the Libertarian ticket right now.
Really?
And Bill Kristol. So,
no.
Yes, you literally. So these are the outliers, people who are not with her and they're not with Trump, which is ridiculous to me. That you have these people who are trying to marginalize and basically smear, Ron Paul. I mean, not even really smear him. They were trying to pretend like he didn't even exist. Bill Kristol especially.
Yeah.
During 2008. And now here you have them acting like they're going to vote. They're totally okay with voting for a libertarian. It's the most hilarious thing in the world. And I think that the only reason maybe why they are saying that is because Gary Johnson, at least his current iteration of himself, doesn't represent the anti-war faction of libertarianism, like in the same way that Ron Paul did.
Yes.
And it's actually kind of interesting to see what things Gary Johnson is okay with and what things he's not. So, for example, the Ron deal, he's not for it. I think he actually was okay with that attempt to stop that sort of Republican Party attempt to stop that deal. And he also says that he was okay with like the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So he's got some weird squirrely views that I could see a neoconservative who's this desperate right now, feeling comfortable like they can proclaim they're behind him. But
oh no, I was just gonna interject real quickly. I was at Liberty Fest many years ago, the first time around that Gary Johnson ran, and at that point his vice presidential candidate Jim Gray spoke when I was there, and he got up in front of this supposedly huge room full of libertarians and said that bombing Iran was okay. And of all of the speakers there, including many prominent ones, we don't have to name all the names, only one person in that whole entire room got up, John Bush, and he called him out in front of everyone and said that guy is a phony, and this is and I think it illustrates that the Libertarian Party is not the libertarian movement. Johnson's newest iteration is, him going, the video of him saying, when someone asked him, well, why'd you call Trump a pussy? And he said, well, I shouldn't have said that, but he is one, he's a big one. I've climbed mountains and gone on all these things, again, like back down to, I've got a bigger dick than this guy does. Yeah. So that's like, that's like the level, which again is just like there's such a cliche within the liberty movement, that it is just a bunch of, jockey guys, who love the, business and Ayn Rand.
Yeah. No, it's really unfortunate how, I could go on for a long time about that, but yeah, it's a bummer how the libertarian movement in this country is more associated with with that side of it now, rather than
or Peter Thiel, who loves Donald Trump.
Exactly. And
of course, too, people should note that when Johnson started to gain what little traction he had, but still significant, the last election, who attached himself immediately to him? Roger Stone, who, of course, is a longtime GOP trickster for everything, and he's rebranded himself as Mr. Alternative, but a complete ran and funded Al Sharpton's presidential campaign. So that should tell you something right there. But and of course he is Donald Trump's longtime advisor and friend.
Just really quickly on Stone is what's interesting about him is someone else pointed this out to me, and I think that they're right, is that he's actually the one who brought out of the shadows all these Bill Clinton rape allegations again. He was the one who sort of managed to push them into the spotlight. So it's, while I can't say that I doubt the claims of these women who claim they're raped by Bill Clinton, it is interesting that that is arguably one of his dirty tricks, yet there's obviously some truth to it. So, the guy's good at what he does. For
definitely.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, he learned from people like Lee Atwater, Roy Cohn.
Apparently he stood up on stage the first night of the convention not the first night, the preview night, and started talking about how there's all this new DNA evidence that Vince Foster was actually killed. And it actually came from a left-leaning media outlet. It didn't even come from like a right-leaning conspiracy anti-Clinton thing. He pulled it cleverly from I think it might have been Mondoweiss or something. So, to me, that's really, I mean, the fact that he's even gotten people like Alex Jones to find him trustworthy and stuff is, to me, really a brilliant move. That a political campaign, a mainstream one in this country, is pulling stuff like that off, and it keeps doing it. I mean, or even the Ted Cruz JFK thing.
Yeah, I was going to mention, yeah.
But that actually, there's some weird things about that there might be some truth to. I mean, well, Ted Cruz's father was associated with some questionable Cuban freedom fighters. So, but I mean, so it's just fascinating what kind of stuff he's pulling out. But
oh, definitely, and the way he's ingratiated himself to the alternative community. And again, Roger Stone, this is the guy that worked for Nixon. Okay. Then, same thing, Bush and Reagan, he worked for Bush, and now he's Mr. Anti-Bush, he's got his book about the Bush crime family and all this stuff. I don't buy that for a second. This guy seemed to have no problem at the time working for this criminal family. And ultimately, for all of his, I'm a libertarian, he's done nothing but derail the liberty movement. And there were a lot of people at the time when he jumped on Gary Johnson's train that were like, wait, why is this guy around here all of a sudden? He would show up at events. He would start floating all these weird rumors. And then what did he do? He disappeared. And then boom, he's pimping Trump for the GOP. So he's right back to where, he started. I think that's the thing with Roger Stone. At the heart of it all, Stone is he is about the Republican Party. Now, if he can rebrand that and make it seem alternative and use Trump, then fine, he will. But ultimately, the GOP, which pays his bills, no matter what form they take on, they're still ahead of the game. And also, seriously, anyone out there, look up Roger Stone and Al Sharpton, because their relationship is bizarre at best and scary at worst. But it's funny too. Again, Bill Kristol saying he would vote for Libertarian, which does show you that how far the Libertarian Party has gone. And what's actually kind of scary too, Robbie, is that like Gary Johnson doesn't even have a problem with this. He says he's like when he was asked that Jeb Bush is interested, he said that's great or something. Which just like, if he really wanted to get votes, he should have gone, held a press conference and said, I will never allow any of these neocons to, help me or be in my party. But, instead he and that's what's funny again, Ron Paul and even Rand Paul to a degree said neocon, called out the neocons. And now Gary Johnson seems to have no problem with them.
Well, it brings up a really interesting paradigm, because it almost seems like then that means that that a lot of people know that the neocons are still very influential and powerful in DC, and that maybe we shouldn't even call them neocons anymore, because we can see that all these other people around respect them and don't call them neocons anymore. So maybe we shouldn't either. I mean, I think that's kind of the vibe right now is it's still taboo really to outright call some of these people neocons. And you saw that difference between Ron and Rand Paul was that Ron Paul was calling them all out by name. Repeatedly. He did several floor speeches where he put it all into the official record. He basically laid out, half of the plot for a very heavy agenda in a speech that's all transcribed. So, I mean, that's the difference between, 2005, 2007, where it's still very fresh in people's minds that these neoconservatives were driving us off of a cliff. These insane, hawkish, neoconservatives were. Yeah. And when Rand Paul got in, you could already see that change, that shift in DC, where it was already taboo to, maybe it was even taboo to even say the word neocon. He was testing the waters. He was saying the word neocon. He was going out there on TV and even calling Hillary Clinton a neocon. But then a few months later, you saw him pulling back from that. And when the people in the press were actually like, well, who do you mean by neocon? Do you mean Bill Kristol? Do you mean Charles Krauthammer? And he wouldn't even respond. He refused to say. And I think that it might seem like a small thing, might not seem very significant, but I think that it really does mark a change in the acceptability level of neocons in DC, and how it's really not even, they've blended in so well that you can't even say, call them out as neocons. And I think that explains why someone like Gary Johnson probably knew not to. I mean, I don't even think he was, it was a dumb or naive moment of him. I think that he knew, not to overtly call these people out because he sees an opportunity. Well, maybe they will help boost his campaign.
Oh, I mean, if you look at polls and stuff, the way even Johnson is doing right now, I mean, now even the mainstream is talking about him in a way that they would have never have done that 4 years ago when he ran. I mean, I think if he continues on the rate that he's going, he might even be allowed in some of the debates. The way he's polling,
that'd be fascinating. And they're definitely giving him a little bit more of a safe ride in the press than Jill Stein, who's already.
Yeah, I know, it's interesting. I did notice that. It's like Jill Stein. If you even hear about her, it's only to sort of malign her. Whereas it's interesting that Johnson, I guess, because there is this split on the right. I think if Bernie Sanders if Bernie Sanders had stayed in or something. Or if he said, "Oh, I'm gonna go independent," we would be talking a lot about him. But because there's a split on the right, there is. Oh, well, that must, then libertarianism is the only answer. We have to vote for him. But it's funny. I mean, I was reading something the other day, and they were talking about, and I doubt it, but maybe there's some truth to it. That Johnson could easily take a whole bunch of states in a general election. And then like what that would mean, it would, and it's funny because then the article sort of phrases it as like, well, it would be a constitutional crisis, I guess basically state, there can only be two parties, and this is why we should never have a third party candidate. But I don't know. I had talked about this with Tom Secker. This is like a couple weeks back, but I was saying, I wish that, there was like Ross Perot would run or something like that. Cause I could see myself voting for Ross Perot before, Gary Johnson or any of these other lunatics out there. I don't know, Robbie, we're getting down towards the end of this. This is kind of a weird sort of thing, but I was talking about this with my sister the other day. But these ideas that Bill Clinton is like losing it. Did you seen him at the DNC where he's playing with the balloons?
Oh my God! Yeah, no, wait. Sorry. We keep going.
Oh no, I was just what do you think of that? And also just the idea that he's actually sick. That's why he's so I don't really buy this. I'm a vegan. I really wonder if he has syphilis or AIDS or something like that. Because this guy's never ever worn a condom. So what do you make?
No, he's raw dogging it.
Oh, definitely, yeah. And
never, no bag for Bill, never.
Yeah, that should be on their new campaign slogan.
Yeah, I mean, here's I'll get into a little bit more dark Robbie cynical mode right now, just for a special treat for your listeners. So these are the kind of things that my sister and I go off sometimes on stuff like this on our podcast, and sometimes we laugh about it because there's really no other way for us to, I guess, emotionally process it. It's just you have to laugh at just how fucked up things are sometimes. And of course, we're fans of Veep. I don't know how much of the new season or the newest season you watch, but it seems like they're making the show even more vulgar and more cynical, and making the main character more unlikable and more of a monster, as the show goes on, which I really appreciate, because I think it reflects what's happening in this country, and almost better than any other political show. So they actually do this in House of Cards. Spoiler warning: House of Cards season 4 and Veep season 3, where Claire's mom dies in House of Cards, and in Veep, the president's mom dies, and they both use it. There's a plot line in each show where they both use it to get a bounce in the polls. Their mother dying, their elderly mother having to be the plug pulled, basically. So, I don't know how dark this thought experiment is, but I honestly was thinking this whole time it's been a few months since Bill Clinton has been acting incredibly sick, is the only way to describe it, or almost as if he has dementia. It doesn't to me just seem like a physical ailment. I mean, it could be Parkinson's. I don't want to disparage anyone suffering from Parkinson's or MS or anything like that. So I hesitate to be, too dark about it, but I think, it would be really convenient if this was sort of like a secret thing that they were keeping a secret, they weren't telling the American public about, and then they'll sort of unveil it as sort of like a campaign bounce to be like, guess what, guys? I've had to suffer through my husband having Parkinson's this whole time during this. I mean, she won't say it like that, of course, but she'll be like, it'll be a teary-eyed reveal.
Goes around and assaulting women left and right, and I had to deal with that, and now he's dying.
And now I'm here by his side. My husband, who I love, is it maybe not dying. Well, see, this is how they'll get the most bounce for their buck out of it. First, they'll say he's diagnosed with Parkinson's or something like that. Teary-eyed reveal, big speech. It'll be like 10 times more powerful than Obama's "My Grandma Died" speech. I don't know if you remember that. It was like from 2 days before the election. It definitely was a bounce for him. Let's just be honest. I mean, that was definite gain in the polls for him. And it was genuine. It wasn't crocodile tears. I mean, the guy his grandma died. He was sad. But I see the Hillary campaign and just her as a person being more cynical and manipulative and more used to this game. So if Bill Clinton is dying of some kind of degenerative illness, I feel like they are already strategizing on how to use it for her platform. And then even crazier, let's say she gets into office. I mean, when's the last time a president in office's spouse died when they were in office? I mean, imagine if he died right before the end of her first term. Another bounce. Imagine this public sympathy for the first female president's husband dies while she's in office, and then you get all this free press about, is it morally right or not for her to like date someone else now, and like how does that work? It's gonna be insane. I mean, I'm not saying it's gonna actually happen, but if it did happen, it would be great for her as a politician. So.
Well, and I think that just illustrates also that is the type of person that Hillary Clinton is. Like if it would help her for Bill to kick the bucket, I'm sure she would be into it, or at least would contemplate the idea. If only we could speed this up or something. Because she is, again, I mean, she's a nasty, despicable psychopath who, anyone that literally laughs out loud while Gaddafi is being, or any leader is being sodomized, and that video is then being replayed all over the international media, CNN and Al Jazeera, whatever, and who laughs maniacally at that, would have no problem if her husband, died. She would only be looking at it politically. And again, if he is suffering from something, they're not, she's still dragging him around everywhere.
Yeah.
So just quickly, now that we're on that topic, do you make anything of this, like that Hillary Clinton is sick, and there's a thing like there's a hole in her tongue, and that like it was like for a biopsy. I thought it was kind of silly, but then I saw a video of her. It was like a compilation of her coughing. And that is something that even I've noticed, that any time I've ever seen a speech with her, she goes through this weird coughing fit. And her voice like becomes like almost like unintelligible. Look it up. It's like a weird like thing that I don't know. I'd noticed that she always, anytime she does a speech, she's always drinking water. which is not
Absolutely.
weird in and of itself, but you don't see other candidates ever doing that.
Except for Rubio.
Yeah, right, yeah, Marco Rubio, yeah.
And that raises an interesting point, which my theory on that is that I think Hillary Clinton is not – I mean, isn't she almost the same age as Bill?
I think so, yeah.
I mean, I think that she's unusually spry acting for her age. She has an unusual amount of energy on this campaign trail. I mean, I would argue it's very possible that she's on some kind of upper, not an amphetamine necessarily, but some other kind of pharmaceutical stimulant. There's plenty of they actually, this is very commonly prescribed for narcoleptics. Actually, it's called modafinil. It's a non-amphetamine stimulant, which is sometimes given to military pilots and even commercial airline pilots, that can allow you to stay up for up to 48 hours with no crash, so to speak. Like if you keep
like as opposed to like Adderall or something.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's got to be some negative payoff at some point, but I think that all those drugs, even if they're non-amphetamine, they give you they dehydrate you, they give you dry mouth. So I mean, I don't know. That's my theory. I think a lot of these politicians are on drugs like that. They are on or beta blockers.
Yeah.
I mean, have you heard of
with Michelle Bachmann? There are all those rumors. Right? Or Sarah Palin, one of them, that they were on speed.
I don't remember with them, but I mean, I think it's been proven that there's actually a leaked satellite video recording of George H.W. Bush talking about how he was on beta blockers and how he's on basically an illegal sleeping pill. It's like one of the only ones that works for him, and he can't get it here and stuff. So Nixon was on Adderall all the time. I mean, I think it's actually
JFK was a cocktail every morning of drugs.
Yeah,
injection.
I mean, look at the way presidents age when they're in office. I mean, everybody says that's from the stress. I mean, I think that it's almost like they're required to run their bodies into the ground, and sometimes they probably do take some of these pharmaceutical enhancements. But I don't know if that's complete speculation of why Hillary's having these bizarre coughing fits. But I don't know. Whenever I see candidates drinking that much water and having that much dry mouth on stage, I always wonder if they're on some kind of pep pills of some kind.
Rubio would be a perfect candidate. I mean, he looks like he's losing it.
Yeah.
And definitely acts like he's kind of doped up on like speed or Adderall or Ritalin or something like that.
I mean, even a beta blocker is really useful for public speaking because it's not an upper, but it makes it so that like if you shake, if you get nervous or if you sweat, it'll stop your body response to anxiety. So I would be willing to bet the majority of these politicians are at least have beta blockers as a backup, I mean, because it's not just that they're able to get on stage. I mean, they're almost too good sometimes. I don't think even people who are trained in public speaking, I think you need almost a little enhancement or a little extra to be able to like go on the campaign trail day in and day out and speak this often on the media, and on TV and stuff. I don't know, but that's just my personal theory.
No, especially too, you figure like, especially some of the older people that run for president. There's no way they don't have something. There's got to be some mother's little helper getting them through the day. Just because like John McCain. I just don't buy that he's just totally doing that on his own. But anyway, Robbie, the music is coming up. Quickly tell everybody where they can go to get a copy of your film.
Well, A Very Heavy Agenda, a film about kind of everything we've been talking about, the elections, the neocons, Trump versus Hillary. You can get it at averyheavyagenda.com on DVD, or you can watch it streaming or download it online.
Excellent. And thank you all so much for listening. I, of course, will be coming back to you next week. And I'll have a great guest, Jeffrey Augustine, who is a Scientology researcher. So that'll be a great episode. And thank you all again. Of course, you can check it out on American Freedom Radio. And you can also visit my website, PorkinsPolicyReview.com.
No rules. No rules. No taboo topics. No taboo topics. No fear of doom. No fear of doom. We are American Freedom Radio. American Freedom Radio.